We call this Radio Free America. That's why we say the smartest audience in radio is right here. People who listen to this program, even though in much of the country it airs from 6 to 9 p.m. live, Eastern Time. Dinner time, sporting events, all kinds of distractions, and yet you're here. And this program started out in New York City on WABC. There are people in New York City and in the metropolitan area of New York who want liberty, capitalism, limited government. But they're surrounded by people who don't. And we went from WABC and we picked up other stations. Dallas, Fort Worth, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, Chicago, Illinois, Detroit, Michigan. You can name them. We're in Houston, Philadelphia, a great new affiliate there. Virtually every major city. Portland, Seattle. I probably shouldn't have started this. Los Angeles, of course. San Francisco, San Jose, San Diego. When I'm in an airplane, I often look at the map at the back. You ever look at the map at the back, Mr. Producer, the country with all the cities and so forth? And I'll take a pen and start circling the major metropolitan areas, the mid-sized towns, and the small towns where this program is heard. Then I realize I've undercounted, because you can hear this program also on satellite radio, and you can hear this program by simply downloading it on a podcast. There's a reason why there are millions and millions and millions of people who listen to this program in a time slot that was never successful from a nationally syndicated broadcast perspective, ever. That's because there are millions and millions of Americans who still believe in the founding principles, who are independent, who want our country back, who believe in capitalism but have to hear about democratic socialism. That's you. You're magnificent people, my audience. Absolutely magnificent. Sunspots, brown spots, discoloration, and even Donald Trump. He's a remarkable man, really. A remarkable president. I want everyone to keep something in mind. Abraham Lincoln was a truly great man in a truly horrific period in our history, the Civil War. Not the mission, but the carnage. The carnage was just unbelievable. Over 700,000 casualties in a nation of 24, 25 million people. Abraham Lincoln was not a perfect man. You may not agree with all of his policies. Abraham Lincoln suspended habeas corpus for a period of time when there was an uprising within the North in Maryland. And he suspended habeas corpus. He also locked up some so-called reporters. Some of these reporters today who say that Donald Trump is threatening free press. Donald Trump is not threatening the free press. The so-called free press is threatening the professionalism and integrity of the free press, but Donald Trump isn't threatening anything. Lincoln had some reporters, publishers, thrown in prison, and he suspended habeas corpus, which was eventually reversed by the Supreme Court, but nonetheless. Does that mean Abraham Lincoln was a horrible president? Of course not. You look at the big picture. Ronald Reagan was one of our greatest presidents. No question about it. He defeated the Soviet Union. He won the Cold War. That's a big deal. Ronald Reagan signed an amnesty bill. 2.3 million illegal aliens became citizens. Now, of course, he had a deal with the Democrats in Congress, and they don't keep their deals, much like the North Koreans. And they were supposed to help secure the southern border, and they never funded it. But that said, it was a mistake, in my view. Does that mean Ronald Reagan was a terrible president? No, it doesn't at all. Some of these Supreme Court justices that are appointed by Republican presidents. Ronald Reagan nominated Scalia, one of the greatest justices in the history of this country. Frankly, in my view, if not the greatest. He also nominated Sandra Day O'Connor, and after 3 tries, finally, Anthony Kennedy. The Democrats in the Senate had blocked Bork, and they had blocked Ginsburg, both of whom would have been absolutely outstanding. Instead, we got Kennedy. After a couple of years, Kennedy left. Sandra Day O'Connor did the same thing. She thought her role was as a peacemaker, as an arbitrator, almost as a PTA president or something. And anyway, they had no real judicial philosophy. Does that mean Ronald Reagan was a terrible president? No. It's one of the greatest presidents in the history of this country. And I could go through other examples. So when people say to me, both in private and on the radio, but you don't agree with Trump on trade, I say, no, I don't. Now, again, I make an exception for China because China is a mortal enemy as far as I'm concerned. But I don't agree with him on trade. But he has been an outstanding president. He's been fighting on immigration, trying to do the right thing. He has done more to reduce regulations than any president in my lifetime. The judiciary, he's been very earnest about getting constitutionalists on our court and on the other courts. His foreign policy has been exceptional, which is one of the reasons why they keep attacking him over that Helsinki press conference. He's been tough on Russia. He's being tough on China. He's been tough on Iran. He's been tough on North Korea. He's also trying to rebuild our military. He's supported law enforcement after 8 years of disaster under Obama. He's done other great things, and he's done other things I may not agree with. But I think when the day comes and he leaves office, whether it's after a first term, I hope not, or a second term, we're going to miss him. And I think the history books will be quite friendly to him, depending who writes them, of course, but it'll be an era in which the media will look very, very bad in what they've done and how they've exposed themselves. And he's made some absolutely outstanding appointments. His Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, has been incredible. His National Security Advisor, John Bolton, has been, and I know him and I've known him for decades, is incredible. His ambassador to the United Nations, Nikki Haley, who I've never met in my life, she is outstanding. And he's appointed some really top-notch ambassadors. And the best of the bunch is a gentleman by the name of David Friedman, America's ambassador to Israel. And he works with another tremendous ambassador from Israel to the United States, Netanyahu's pick, Ron Dermer, who was born in Miami, whose brother was the mayor of Miami, and whose father was the mayor of Miami. I've gotten to know both of these men. Now, Friedman has been crucial in the recognition of Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, and he's been crucial in the movement of the embassy to Jerusalem, because the fear was, and it was legitimate, that the bureaucracy would slow this down as long as they could, so if a new president came in, he would nix the deal. It is a matter of federal law that these things should have happened. It was passed in 1996, but there was a waiver provision. Every 6 months, the president could sign a waiver, and that's what they all did. They ran on making these moves, and then they would sign waivers. And look what the president did in the Iran deal. He may have prevented nuclear war by nixing that Iran deal. And one of the reports you're not getting on the news is Iran's economy is a disaster. Is a disaster because of what Trump did in the deal and the sanctions he has on Iran. But back to David Friedman. David Friedman visited a family where the son, the husband, the father, this individual, this Israeli, was murdered by a Palestinian terrorist in one of the Jewish settlements. I don't even like the word settlement. I mean, if your ancestors were in a particular place 3,500 years ago, you're not a settler. You're more than that. You're more than that. And so he goes to visit the family. And the so-called foreign minister, I guess he's called, of the Palestinian Authority, or as I prefer to call it, the Palestinian Terrorist Authority, has condemned our ambassador. Now, if this doesn't show that these phony governmental entities that are created both in the Gaza Strip and in Jerusalem and parts there, that these people are, these leaders, these so-called, whatever they call themselves, that they are terrorists, that they have no intention of making peace, then nothing else will. CNN didn't report on this. MSNBC didn't report on this. Nobody reports on this stuff. And then when the terrorists provoke a fight and the Israelis defend themselves, we get the same story over and over and over again. That the Israelis have hit back too hard, that their children dying, this, that, and the other. I want you to think for a minute about our borders. We complain about Canada and trade. I suspect the Israelis wish they had that problem when it comes to their borders. We complain about Mexico and illegal immigration, and we should. It's absolutely a legitimate point. But what do you think the Israelis would prefer? Terrorists or people trying to get into their country? Most of them trying to get jobs and so forth. The media in our country, the free press, just as they lie about what takes place in America, just as they have an agenda to try and wipe out this president and his policies, they do the same with certain of our allies, and in particular Israel. And you watch the Democrat Party and you watch the media, and they're basically the same. You can see the Democrat Party is increasingly anti-Semitic and increasingly anti-Israel. That's right, I said it, because it's true. It's true. And the more quote-unquote democratic socialist it becomes, like Sanders and the other kook, the more it's obvious. Because, you know, they have to defend these people, you see, who are defenseless in America and defenseless in Israel, and on and on and on. Because they're true revolutionaries, don't you know? I'll be right back.
Mark Levin.
If they had had their way, they told us this was not a binary election, which is kind of odd since it is. Hillary Clinton would be president of the United States. So if they didn't vote for Trump, when it came down to Trump as the nominee in the general election, and even in some cases they actually campaigned against him and or voted for Hillary Clinton, then they have some explaining to do. They can criticize Trump on trade. They can criticize Trump on some of these positions he's taken, and yet it's quite odd because their own conduct, their own performance, their own actions would have resulted in Hillary Clinton being elected, which would have been far worse from a conservative perspective and a constitutional perspective, whether it's the courts or regulations or immigration, and yes, trade. And you have some people who do not want to remind you that they didn't vote for Trump. You have some people who do not want to remind you that they opposed him in the general election. Now, they're free to do all those things, but they're not free to pretend that they didn't do that and pretend to rewrite history, and they have some splaining to do, and yet they never do. Let's see here. I want to do this now. Hold on one second. Bear with me, ladies and gentlemen. There we are. Have you ever taken your car in for an oil change and the mechanic